So my name's Ron Silberstein. I appreciate all your patience. And what I'm going to do today is just chat to you a little bit about malt, or the soul of beer, as we would say. In other words, we like to tell people no malt, no beer, because it's the bottom line. You can make beer without hops, but you can't make beer without malt. Not to say I want beer without hops. I really enjoy this here. And so I can see here, if I click chat, then I can see anything that people are writing to me. Okay, perfect. So I'll turn that off for now. But if you guys want to, if you do want to, whoops, darn. I'm still get, okay, that's good to see. So I'm kind of, as you can kind of see, an older school guy in this. I first opened my entry into the business was okay way back when I used to practice law, but I basically in 1996 opened a brewery restaurant in San Francisco called Thirsty Bear Brewing Company, and it a brewery restaurant in San Francisco, and I at the time had chosen to go into the a brewery restaurant as opposed to as opposed to like a microbrewery or whatever, because that to me seemed the quickest way to get beer that I was making in front of people. And back then, people were just really starting to rediscover traditional methods of brewing. It was really like, how Anchor had come out with Liberty Ale and Sierra with Pale Ale, and you could, from both of those, whether it was Sierra, Anchor, could get a porter or a stout or even a barley wine, and things that just people hadn't been done before. But one thing all those had in common was hops. Now, clearly one of the first, I'm sorry, malt. Clearly one of the first things that craft brewing did to differentiate itself was that it started using hops, and Cascade was probably the first one in that sense that just had more. You can instantly notice it. It's like, if malt is the potato and hops are the salt on the potato, well, imagine using, oh, I'll put a little paprika on the potato, or I'll put a little pepper on the potato, or I'll put some cumin or whatever. You can just do so many different things with the hops, and that really was one of the first things that people noticed. But I'll argue that really, one of the most critical things in making beer is the barley. And what we do as and I'm going to talk a little bit about that process of taking barley, which is an agricultural product, and turning it into beer. The first thing that we really do to do that is you have to steep it, you have to germinate it, and then you have to dry it. Now, why do we have to do all that stuff? Those three processes is what malting means. If I say I'm going to malt something, that means you're steeping it, germinating it, and drying it. But why the heck should we have to take barley and do all that? Why can't I just grind it up, add some water, throw in some yeast, and then and be done with it. Start fermenting some beer. Well, if you do that, pretty much the most you'll get from that is bread. You can make some bread. Maybe you'll get a little bit of fermentation, a little bit of cell expansion, but you're not going to get a beer from that. If I take a grape and I squish that, and I have water soluble sugars already there. I have the water, I have the soluble sugars, I have everything right there in that nice little grape. And then I just take, whether it's the wild yeast from the skin or if I want to add yeast, then I have a fermented product called wine. It's great. Same thing with an apple. I could take an apple, I could squish it. I have water soluble sugars in there. I have yeast in the air. I can add a packet of yeast. I have yeast on the skin of the apple. I ferment it. I have myself some cider. No problem. But I can't do that with barley. With barley, the whole purpose of the maltster is to make a water soluble packet of sugars with enzymes, because without enzymes, we can't truly break down those sugars. A simple analogy is, okay, I could take a strawberry and I can take the whole strawberry and put it in my mouth and chew it, and perfect. My organism can handle that. But I can't take a whole watermelon and just shove it in my mouth. I can't certainly can't take a cow if you eat meat, or just eat the whole thing at once. I have to make it into bite-sized pieces. And that is the role of enzymes in the malting process and in the brewing process. You guys know all that. I mean, and but I just wanted to put it in simple terms, in terms of, okay, so that's what we're doing with the malting process and the grain. We're going to make it a packet of sugar with enzymes in it, so that when I do crush that and I add hot water that activates all those enzymes, I have something that the yeast can ferment. If those starches are so long, yeah, you take a seed. I mean, you might ask, well, come on, the seed has sugars in it, doesn't it? Well, if the seed had simple sugars in it, then the second it was in the soil, it would just rot, or it would be eaten by microorganisms or mold or bacteria or whatever. It has to have really long chain starches in it to survive. And so we have to take those really long chain starches and turn it into something that's fermentable. So, what we always say, for example, is that, um, you know, well, this says whiskey. Sorry, this is the one slide that's out of sync from another thing. But, you can say whiskey, you can say beer, but no malt, no beer, no whiskey. Malt's the soul of beer, it's the soul of whiskey. And malt is to beer and whiskey what grapes are to brandy. Now, what you're seeing here is the actual first germination, the first rootlets coming out of those barley seeds. We're going to get longer rootlets, not much longer than some of the longest ones like you see there. And we're going to get what's called an acrospire. Now, the first acrospire grows the length of the kernel, and it grows not on this side. Do you guys see my pointer on the screen or no?
Yes, we do.
Wondering, oh, does this work? Oh, good. Then I can show you the pictures. So there's this end here where it looks like you could put a little screwdriver in it, and that's just where the husk meets, right? But the other side of the kernel, this naked side, right here is a perfect example. Starting from the germen, the embryo, that's the embryo and the germ, and the rootlets come out of there, and the acrospire, the first leaf, grows right up here until it'll pop out of this part here. So this is one that I don't know what happened there, but that just grew like a son of a gun there. It's way longer than the other things, but typically we want that first acrospire just to be the full length of the kernel. If you look here, this is an awn. That is not a growth thing. This is an awn as well. Those are the spiky parts that you see on the grain. But I'm just talking about here, wanted to get you to know, okay, malt's the soul of beer. You can't just squish. I can't just grind barley and ferment it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the industry background, and in that I'm going to get into the history of malting in California. I want to talk a little bit about defining characteristics of Admiral Maltings, because it's like, why open a malting facility in California? I can get from Briess or Rar or Great Western, or heck, bring it in from England. Let's get some Fawcett or some Crisp or some Simpsons, or get some Bayerman from Germany, whatever. Why open a malting company when there's so many? And then I think it's worth talking about, just because it's a lesser known process in making of craft beer. So if you go back, things in the United States are very unique because of Prohibition. At Prohibition, everything got taken off the table. All the breweries shut down, all the distilleries shut down, everything shut down. And so after the end of Prohibition until the 80s, we basically had a period of just bigger and bigger consolidation. This is a huge grain silo, by the way, up in Canada. Anyway, and there were like 4 major malting companies with maybe 13 facilities throughout the U.S. The offerings from the 30s to the 80s just tended to get more and more similar, with American style lagers being the biggest thing. as a side note, American style lager is kind of an interesting thing. In barley, there's either two row or six row. That's just what nature has given us. It's not that one is earlier or older or more original or whatever than the other. Brewers, modern brewers, tend to prefer two row because it has the stem on each side of the stem is one kernel. There's only two kernels per row, but in six row barley on each side of the stem are three kernels, and so it's called six row. Because there's more seeds per row on each side of the stem, then you have less room for the endosperm. The endosperm tends to be smaller, there tends to be more husk, tends to be higher proteins, tends to produce higher enzymes. The when the Germans came to the Midwest, Milwaukee and Wisconsin and Minnesota and all that, what they found mostly was six row barley. If you followed the Reinheitsgebot law back then and made beer, all malt beer from six row barley, it tended to be hazy. It just was not clear, especially at cold temperatures. And even back then, Americans liked their beer clear and cold, even in the 1800s. So what they would do is they learned that if you mixed it with an adjunct like corn, or it could be beets, it could be rice, it could be wheat, but if you added it with another cheaper sugar, the enzymes in the six row were sufficient to break it down. Sometimes you had to cereal cook the adjunct or whatever, but that's a whole nother story. And it made a very clear beer at coldness. But we've kind of gone away from six row, although the major malting facilities still, when they were started to make the very first barleys in the United States, I mean, the first, I want to say, the first North American variety was developed in about 1974. It was Cloggis. Sierra Nevada used to use Cloggis. And it basically was a two row that acted like a six row because it was grown in the Midwest for the major beer producers, and it needed that high enzymatic content, that high protein content. So anyway, but we tended to make malt right up into the 80s, or barley, grow barley that would make malt for the larger brewing manufacturers. So one style of beer, you get one style of malt. You get very few barley varieties. The Cloggis gave way to Harrington, that then gave way to Metcalf, and then to Copeland, and now there's others, Synergy, Odyssey, all sorts of modern varieties, but they all sort of came from those first ones, and they were originally brewed for adjunct brewing. So here's like the large maltsters. You have about four major companies. I mean, they change ownership so much. I can't even, oh, this one's Malt Europe or this one's owned by RAR. I can't really tell you all that now. It's not that important. It just gives you an idea of the limited nature and the few large maltsters there. This is kind of, it's about a year old, a year and a half old. But this was, most of the, many of the craft maltsters that are in the United States. Here's us near San Francisco. This is actually in Chico. They don't make barley malt, but they make rice malt and gluten-free. They're gluten-free, and so we're kind of a gluten palace at Admiral Maltings. So I send people to them all the time if they want something without gluten. But as you can see, this is nowhere near the 9,000 breweries that exist in the United States now. Nowhere near. But to me, and I hope you guys, wherever you are, in whatever state you're in, always say, who's the local maltster? Ask for your local maltster. If it's California, it might be ask for Admiral, whatever. Because what is, to me, from an intellectual, environmental standpoint, what the hell is the point of saying, oh, we're a local brewery, we make local beer. I went and picked the mint myself from the woods, outside of where I am, and we put in, this fruit that this farmer grew and all that. That's not the heart of beer. That's, again, a few spices. That's great. I love that they're trying to do something. But 99.9%, I'm telling you that in California, we're not even 0.1% of the malt that's sold in California. But they're buying their malt. It's either coming from up here in Canada, That's where a lot of the malt's grown. A little bit in Montana and North Dakota, Idaho. This area is now it's moved from the Midwest over to here a little bit, but they're getting it from thousands of miles away. They are not supporting their local agricultural community. They are not creating any sort of local resilience with it. They're not giving farmers an alternative. In California, for example, I'm extremely happy that we help give farmers an alternative to water intensive crops. We grow a lot of cash crops, so whether it's almonds or walnuts or tomatoes or fruit or strawberries or garlic or what, alfalfa, whatever the hell we're growing, it uses a hell of a lot more water than barley does. We focus on working with farmers who get as close. I wish every single farmer we work with did all five of these things. Some do, but not many. But there's five basic principles that we feel can be called sustainable farming. Minimizing soil disturbance, maintain a living root, keeping the soil covered, and animal integration, and planting the diverse crops. Why is this important? And I'm going to tell you about each one of these. Well, first of all, the way we plow and till soil right now, so this is focusing on minimal soil disturbance. To generate 3 centimeters of topsoil takes like 1,000 years. But if we, at the current rate that we're plowing and tilling and letting wind, rain, and other things erode, and just not allowing stubble to grow back into the ground, not re-tilling the soil with cover crops and or even last year's main crop. The UN, this is not something I'm inventing. This is Scientific American, citing a UN official from the Food and Agriculture Organization, saying that we could lose all of our topsoil within 60 years. I mean, that's a scary, scary concept. So going back, just to go to others, so no-till, there's other things besides not losing your topsoil. By doing no-till agriculture is where you don't necessarily plow and till intensively the soil. You might do minimal till, but you are, number one, you're keeping the root system intact. Number two, every time you plow and till the soil, the carbon in the soil and the nitrogen in the soil interact with the air, and you're releasing two, either one of the most powerful greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, or carbon dioxide, one of the most plentiful. That's mostly what you would release. Secondly, you're disturbing the whole microbiome that takes a long time, or a season at least, to develop in there. And we have a whole synergy of bacteria and fungi where they're mutually creating sugars for uptakes and creating, fungal growth that literally is how things that go on within the soil. If there's whether it has to do with nutrients, whether it has to do with stressors or disease that's in the soil, a lot of this is communicated electrochemically through fungal networks and things like that. So plants, if they know that there's some sort of disease in the soil, they can respond, and they respond to that, but they need to know about it. And by keeping a healthy ecosystem underneath the soil, you can help, you can maintain that. Living roots, it can absorb more water. You can grow on less rainfall. On no-till agriculture, you can grow from 1 to 2 inches of less rainfall a year. You're keeping the soil covered. What does that do? It means that there's no wind and rain erosion. It means that if you plow that back into the soil, that you have actual nutrients that you're putting back into there. If you rotate your crops, then you're not just creating a vector for disease, but which is what monoculture does, which is the way we've basically been farming since the fertilizing intensive crops from about post-World War II until now. And by using animal integration, you're adding the natural nitrogen from the animal waste as well as aerating the soil. And to do all five of these, use cover crops, so you're never leaving the soil totally exposed, minimal till to no-till, crop rotation, and deep root systems. You're doing a lot for the health of the planet. Admiral Maltings, basically, what defines us? We floor malt, which is an ancient way of malting. That's where we spread our malt in thin layers on the floor. I'll go into that more a little bit later. I'm going to explain the malting process. Like I said, we work with Sustainably Farmed. We work with all our farmers are in California. If I have a farmer in Washington State, it's because I have a customer in Washington State that wants Washington grown barley. But we try and connect people to the grains that are grown locally. And we have fun we're doing a collaboration right now with crisp maltings from England, where we're using Hana barley, which was the first barley grown in the Pilsen area, the Czech Republic, in 1842, and created some of the first Pilsners. And they've re-commercialized this and are growing it in Norfolk, really close to their malting facility in Great Ryborough. And we're going to floor malt their Hana barley. They're going to floor malt some of our California barley, and we're going to see what happens. On that note, I meant to talk about this earlier, so I'm going to stop and do that now. I said, Chris Maltings is going to grow floor malt using California barley. Let me take a sip of my beer here. I'm very thirsty from all this talking. Oh, I'm going to take 1 second and look at this chat, see if anyone's asked me any questions. Oh, cool. Someone had been to Thirsty Bear. That's pretty cool. Anyway, so the biggest agricultural export of California, its biggest agricultural export was barley, in particular malting barley, between the years 1860 and 1940. And we used to export significant amounts of barley to England. I mean, we it was used in the United States, it was used in California breweries, it was used everywhere. But the malting companies in England revered California barley. They called it sun-kissed because it had no fusarium, no head blight. We have very dry temperatures before our harvest. It almost never rains around harvest time until lately with global warming, when anything can happen and all bets are off. But rain around the harvest time not only can cause mold and mildew and a higher moisture content in the barley, which then has to be dried. And fusarium causes a vomitoxin, which causes gushing in beer. And it's, you had to keep the parts per million of that quite low and everything. But it has a beautiful, it was grown primarily, one of the premier barley growing regions was in the Hungry Hollow and Dunnigan Hills area outside of Davis in the Sacramento Valley. And so it was just revered and especially during Prohibition, we would be exporting a lot of the malting barley there too. And even before that, like I said, from the 1860s right up until the time submarine warfare killed that tradition in about 1940. But so, why do we do floor malting? We do it because we genuinely believe, and there's a paper published by Dr. Griggs, David Griggs, the technical director at Chris Maltings. They only have a tiny floor malting facility. All their floor malting basically is about the same amount that we do, but they sell thousands of tons, and we sell, they sell hundreds of thousands of tons, if not millions of tons, and we'll sell maybe 1,500 tons a year. But that's about how much they'll floor malt too. But basically, because pneumatic malting is where, rather than spreading you steep and then you germinate and then you dry. This is the germinating process. And rather than germinating in a 3-4 inch layer on the floor, pneumatic malting puts the malt 3-4 feet deep. It forces air through it. I mean, so much so that you literally have pressure locks and everything else going in and out of where the malt is germinating, but it's humidified, chilled, oxygenated air that just forces the respiration, accelerates the respiration of the barley. Totally different microbiome, totally different. I know there's a better word for it, but I'll call it micronutrients. They're just the microbiome is going to be different. It's just going to be different. And the organic, when they do, if they do analysis of organic compounds, they see spikes that exist. They haven't correlated it necessarily one-to-one to flavor, but they find, spikes in floor malted of certain organic compounds that aren't in pneumatically malted. And then whenever you do a hedonic or just a blind tasting traditional, just taste this malt that's been identical barley variety, identical year. It's kilned identically, and the only thing differently is that it's floor malted versus pneumatic malting. People do have a preference for the floor malted. It's so anyway. So we chose it because of that, but also because it's a great story to tell. It's a great tradition, great heritage. That's what we're doing with Crisp, is we're celebrating the tradition of floor malting. That's why we're collaborating with them. We want to celebrate that, and we want to celebrate the unique characteristics that a heritage variety of barley can add. And then, so we just think it's a great character, great store. We either do certified organic, or we work with these regenerative farmers. Organic, it's pretty, people are pretty familiar with that now. You're not using any petrochemicals. You're not using any non-organic compounds that poison our soil, that poison our workers, that get into the water table, that kill our beehives. That, I mean, you name it. The glycosates that cause cancer and just get into our hormonal systems. I mean, we have, yes, we fed the world, and yes, no small feat. Yes, we've increased production of everything, but we've ruined our planet in the process, and so we gotta figure out a different method. And anyhow, no-till farming. I think I went over that pretty well before. Carbon friendly, maintains biodiversity. That's it. We do locally grown. All our farmers are in California. Supports their economy. For the first time, if someone cares, they can notice terroir. Would you ever imagine a winemaker who just, I'll take grapes. What kind of grapes? Oh, you mean red or white? Oh, okay, I'll have the red grapes. They don't know the variety. They don't know where it was grown. They don't know what soil it came from. They don't know if it's a Pinot or a Cabernet or a Syrah. Can you imagine a winemaker doing that? But I can't just imagine. I know so many brewers who have no clue where their barley was grown, where it came from, what variety it is. And even if they do, even if they know that it's these two varieties, grown in the north, in the continental United States, it's not going to be the same year after year, because the large maltsters blend their malt for consistency. They want the same protein level to the best they can, the same specs, so that a brewer doesn't have to look at, I mean, you should all look at your certificate of analysis, and it does change from year to year. But obviously, they were originally brewing for the largest of maltsters, and even the way we were trained, or I was trained, you want consistency, consistency, consistency. A winemaker celebrates the agricultural differences from year to year. Brewers have a harder time doing that. But we allow people to do that, because we use one harvest year from one farmer, typically, or if it's not a single farmer, it'll be just the exact same region. They might as well be the same farmer. So terroir is something that we're reintroducing into beer. And when you think about it, every single great beer style came from ingredients in its area. The Pilsen in the Czech Republic, it's a combination of the water, the noble hops, the Hana barley that they grew, and the soil conditions, the mineral content that led to, so you had a similar flavor characteristics. Or if you're talking about, the ales from Burton-on-Trent, or a Lambic from in Belgium, all these are a combination of what yeast. What was the microflora there? What was the barley that they could brew there? How did they kiln it? What was the water like there? It's a combination of these things, and we've just completely done away from that sort of expression. I mean, it's kind of cool that you can brew any style beer you want, because you can get ingredients from anywhere in the world, but why not celebrate your region and what you can express? So, we also can use different specialty grains. We use a variety that was developed by Dr. Lynn Gallagher. He's in this picture here. I'm moving little thing out here. But this guy here, Lynn Gallagher, he just on his own at UC Davis in the small grains program, he's growing all sorts of stuff. This is forage. I think this almost looks like forage triticale, or else it's forage citron. It has no awns on it. But he bred on his own for about 15 years, was brewing malting quality barley, maybe hoping that Budweiser and Fairfield would pick it up, or who knows what. But we use his variety. It's resistant to the local diseases, yellow dwarf virus, striped rust, these sort of things. We're getting even better varieties. We also can use really cool. We use a variety that UC Davis developed from a landrace that the Spanish brought over a barley over 400 years. I mean, what in the 1400s? So, well, let's say 1500s. Early 1500s, but that's 500 years ago. And this barley they brought over was called a Mediterranean barley. It was probably originally from the Atlas Mountains, and it became acclimated to the climate here in California, and became a landrace. And then UC Davis started with about 200 different lines, and they formed a new barley called Atlas barley. And so here's the barley being grown in. This is, I don't know if this is the Dunnigan Hills area. I think this is basically in Woodland, where we grow stuff. Here's dry farming. You can dry farm barley and you don't have to irrigate it. Barley can exist on about 17, 18 inches rainfall a year. That's exactly what we have in California. It's really cool how on the side of a hill, the combine turns sideways, stay parallel to the ground there. And of course, every farmer drinks beer in the fields after a hard day's work. And that hat, just so you guys don't think I'm a MAGA sort, because I'm certainly not. This says "Make Malt Great Again." That was when it was a joke before it became all too scary. Anyhow, these are our steep tanks. These are the tanks where we soak the grains. You can see it's a 60-degree cone. We aerate it. These are tubes. There's another tube under here. You can't see it under the skirt of here, but that we aerate the water. And we aerate the water because you got to oxygenate the water to allow respiration. You don't want to drown the barley, but we're awakening it there. Here's the bubbles coming up. It almost looks like it's boiling. It's a real vigorous boil. And then you let it rest. So you might soak it for 12, 14 hours. You might let it rest for 14, 16 hours as from the germ in the embryo, and then it goes to the endosperm. The water equilibrates there in the kernel, going from the germ end where the embryo is to the distal end where the acrospiral will eventually come out. And so it's a combination of soaking it, letting it dry, soaking it, letting it dry. Maybe we soak it a third time and then cast it on the floor there. How do we get it on the floor there? The floor, by the way, is PEX tubing. It's hard to see, but right here is some glycol. That's a wire, but now you can't see it on this side. They're on the other side of the columns. But we basically have glycol that goes down into the floor, and there's PEX tubing throughout the floor. Just like fermentation is an exothermic reaction, so is growing barley, germination. And so to control that temperature, and so that we're not growing grass or a plant, but rather modifying the kernel of the barley and breaking down all the cell walls and getting those sugars ready to grow a plant rather than growing a plant, we do temperature control, and we do that by a chilled floor. Everybody would naturally think, oh, well, you're heating the floor. No. Just like fermentation, we get plenty of heat through germination. And this barley is not drying out. This is probably at 37% moisture content. This has been soaked in here, and it is now germinating. We do not want it to dry out on the floor. We turn it on the floor. This is like an electric rototiller, and we'll turn it twice a day to oxygenate it, to separate those rootlets I showed you in the very early picture of germinating barley, and to equilibrate the temperature a little bit, because the bottom of this little bed, this bottom of this 4 to 6 inch bed is very cool, and the top gets a lot warmer. This is a traditional bobby barrel that is used. Bobby, an engineering company in the 1700s in England, first invented it, but it's just a perfectly centered wheelbarrow, but that it doesn't tip over or anything like that, and you can just easily dump it. And this is being dumped onto the floor there. The big wheels make it very easy to control and maneuver. This is the rake. We have a pub called the Rake at the malt house, and this is the traditional way to turn the barley. Our beds get a little thick, and basically after 2, 3 days, it would be very difficult to turn with the rake. I used to, in the very beginning, I was there shoveling it because it was just too. So the rake is usually loose where the floors can be much longer. And our beds are a little thicker because we can chill the bed a little bit. And so it allows us to have a slightly thicker bed, maybe an inch thicker, which is a lot, over 3,000 square feet or whatever. It's a lot of barley. But anyhow, we use that mostly that electric rototiller you see. We do just like they do at Fawcett or Crisp. This is a winch, and there's a cable there, and it goes to this pulley that's right there, and that pulley goes to this plow, and we'll just plow the barley right off the floor into a pit, which will then convey it to our kiln. And here's our kiln. Well, this is what's called a jet slinger. It's our it throws the malt. It's like a snowblower, pitching machine, and it shoots all the malt in there. Why? Because we don't want to trample the malt in there. We don't want to pack it down. We want to create a nice bed where the air is going to come from the bottom to the top and dry it out. And that's what we're going to do in the kiln. We're going to start it at about 120 degrees, and by the time we finish curing, let's say a Pilsner style malt, we'll have finished 24 hours later with a 3-hour cure at about 185 degrees, and we'll have taken that moisture content of the barley from about 47% all the way down to under 4%. To get the air into the kiln and underneath that bed, that barley is all on a screen, and that screen is identical to the false bottom in a mash tun with the wedge wire. It's identical to that. And it creates a huge surface area for the air to flow up, but it keeps, so there's a plenum underneath the barley, which means it's a duct, and the top of the duct is a screen, and that's the only way the air can escape. The duct goes nowhere, but there's that plenum, and on the top is that false bottom, and the barley goes up through there. This fan can take from the outside. This is our intake, goes from the outside down in through here, and it shoots it across here, which is a heat exchange. The fan blows the air across. So it can move 30,000 cubic feet of air a minute. This is the heat exchange, and this is just the air intake for the gas-fired jets. There's basically stainless steel tubes that run the length of the heat exchange, and those stainless steel tubes have gas-fired jets inside. The air flows over that and into the kiln. So basically, the malt is above about that line. You see these temperature probes? That's about where the malt starts, right about there. One of them's a little above the bed, but we'll have about a 26 to 29-inch bed up there of malt that the air blows through. In the last picture, you could see, no, where was that? Sorry. Okay, whatever. I'll show it to you here. So this is what I talked about, the false bottom of the pill. That's the top of the plenum. So that's what the malt goes on. This is what the kiln looks like once it's filled with malt. That temperature gauge is a little high there, but whatever. This is a false wall. That's what we take down after it's dry to push the malt out. On the other side here is an auger, which will help take the malt out of the kiln. And he's leveling it there because the air has to flow equally through there. We don't want it to find an easy out. After we kiln it and dry it, it literally comes out of the kiln into the seed cleaner. This seed cleaner has three screens in there. I better finish so you have some time for some questions. I'm almost done anyway. 3 screens, and those screens are basically there. This is the exit to the top screen, the middle screen, the bottom screen. And what they do is they shake vigorously. First, before we shake all the malt with the screens, which basically sizes it and takes away dust and husks and rootlets and things like that. This is it's called a deculmer or a rootlet remover. The rootlets of malt are called culms. Just having a beer, and we this is like a long shaft in there with, where did my, there, there's a long shaft in there with paddles that kind of rub the malt. Then it goes into here, it's shaken. The clean malt that's sized perfectly and very clean goes into here, goes up here, gets dumped there, then comes back down. It's a little bucket elevator that just circles there. This is our, that's our hopper, and it comes down. This measures and weighs the bags. We put a bag right on here, and we click a button, and it clamps onto the bag, and it's not shown here, but we have a little sewing machine that we sew the bag shut. We use Munchkin workers who are all underaged from an orphanage to keep our labor dollars very low. It's my daughter, she loves the malting facility. And there, we just bag it up, we sew it shut. You can see how each bag is sewed shut. Those are the end of the things, and stack it on pallets and ship it out of there. And so there you have it. That is how we make malt, and it includes a little bit of the history of malting. And so here, I'll go first with some of the questions. Thank you. I'm glad you guys, oh, wow, there's a bunch of questions here. Okay. Where do we source our barley from? Okay, yeah, mostly California. These days, mostly the Sacramento Valley. We also grow some organic barley. There's a dry in the Klamath Basin in a high altitude in Tule Lake. I want to make sure I see these. The screen got different, but I want to, oh no. I want to see those questions. Are you guys still hearing me and everything?
Yeah, Ron, we can still hear you. Just to hang on a sec, just to let you know, we've got to do some audio switching to be able to ask live questions here. So when I bring the microphone around and somebody's got a question, wait a second before you start to answer it so we can make sure the audio is going around.
Finish the questions in the chat box first. I don't know why, but it's disappeared from my, let's see, maybe. Yeah, oh yeah, here, wait. Okay, got it. You're chatting as a guest. Got it. Okay, cool. All I wanted to do is just go over those. Is that okay to go over those first?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first one was where does it come from? So mostly Tule Lake and in the Klamath Basin in the Sacramento Valley. Yes, different. Okay, the one question here is, are your processes different based on different types of barley? Absolutely. Barley could have pre-harvest sprouting, and barley could have water sensitivity, or it can be a really, really genetically hard kernel where water doesn't easily penetrate it. So a lot of this has to do with steeping. But germination's another thing. Some barleys will germinate in 4 days. Some will take 5 days. Older varieties might take 7 days. So absolutely, we adjust our process based on the barley. How do you prevent mold growth? Well, think about that. We don't. We do. We do very simple things. We keep the floor, we clean the floors in between each thing. We keep a clean facility. But think about it. Every single seed that's put into the ground would succumb to mold if it didn't have natural defenses against mold. So we just simply rely on not encouraging moldy atmosphere, encouraging mold growth. We sanitize the floor between every time we cast new malt on it. But essentially, the barley is going to outcompete any mold, the growing barley, just as it does in nature. And just as, quite frankly, a really healthy yeast will outcompete, maybe lesser wild yeast. So we start with healthy, non-moldy, non-disease compromised barley. So part of that has to do with what do you accept. We could certainly accept, it would be a huge mistake, but we certainly could accept a crop where there's already mold on the seeds, but we don't do that. And now I'll wait for your questions. I'll wait a minute. And I hope everyone, I'll just pretend I heard a big round of applause and that everyone.
All right, so if anyone's got a question for Ron, we'll walk around to the first one here.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. So throughout the whole malting process, if your QA department, your quality assurance department, what would be like your critical control points, or what would be like the points to where like throughout the malting process where it's like really essential that this has to be exactly right, or else you're not going to have a good product?
Yeah. I'm trying to. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. It doesn't matter. Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to see you guys more, and I can't seem to do that. But so, yes, like in most things, there's critical points in the process where it's controlled. Number one, like I said, we monitor the barley that comes in the door. It's not going to have insects. It's not going to have weevils. I mean, hopefully, it's not like we've never fucked up on this. But ideally, you don't want anything coming into your malt house that has any mold on it, that has any disease on it, that has any insects in it. Then some preliminary tests we do are ones called pre-harvest sprouting. We need to know whether any moisture got into the kernels post-harvest that caused some germination that's imperceptible to the human eye, but just started some enzymatic reactions inside the barley. Depending on the degree of pre-harvest sprouting, you might not be able to use it at all, or you might have to use it very quickly before it loses its capacity to germinate again. The other key component we look at before we even start malting is the protein content. If we have a 14% protein content barley, then that means that instead of 81 or 82% extract, or potential extract, you're going to have more like 75 or 76%. It's not. I mean, there's other things besides protein versus carbohydrate, but the bottom line is that we don't want. It leads to colloidal instability, too much protein. It can make great mouthfeel and great foam and all that, but too high a fan also leads to instability, although fan is good for yeast, so it's a balance. So we have to look at the protein content too. So we look at the quality of the barley, protein content, pre-harvest sprouting, those kind of things. Along the process, we're constantly measuring moisture content, certainly in steeping. We're going to look at the chitting, which is the first sign of rootlet growth. We're going to look at the rootlets. We're going to measure the temperature while they're on the floor every single day to ensure it's within the range we want. We're going to look and make sure that the rootlets start to differentiate into multiple rootlets. We're going to measure the acrospire growth, how quickly it's going from the germ end at the embryo into the distal end, and then we're going to know the moisture content when it comes off the floor, when it goes into the kiln, and in the kiln, we're going to be kilning it until such time as we measure the moisture content then. All that really is process related, and that can get, and after that, we're going to do a friability. We have a friability meter in-house, and so we can measure moisture content and friability. And then we could do a hot steep, and we can taste it and all that, but we don't know really what we did until we send that malted barley out to a lab for analysis, and we get your typical certificate of analysis, which will have everything from soluble protein to total protein to alpha amylase and to diastatic power to protein content to the pH of it to pugs and wugs, which has to do with friability for sure. So all these different aspects that we'll look at it afterwards.
All right, we got any more questions for Ron? Bring the mic around here to Andy.
Hi, Ron. Thanks for the great presentation. It was very enlightening. I have a question about for all your products. Do you start with the same malted or the same barley from whatever sources you get them from, and then the kilning is different, or do you say, well, okay, this product comes from from this farm and starts with this, and this is the kilning we go through, and this product starts from this farm? I'm wondering what you do in your process.
It can be any of that or none of that, and I would say what we do is a little bit of that. For example, okay, we have a farmer and he grew barley, and unfortunately the protein content's really high. But geez, we don't want to ruin our relationship with that farmer. He just put all this money and energy and time, and if we tell him, sorry, sell it as feed, get 9 cents a pound instead of 29 cents or 30 cents a pound, then he's, we lose a farmer. So we go, oh, well, but it's only 12.5% protein. It's really only a percentage over. Why don't we use that to make distiller's malt, where they want a higher diastatic power? And we'll leave it on the floor for an extra day to germinate. We're going to increase the DP. Or we go, ooh, that's a higher protein content. The more proteins in there means essentially once you malt it, the more amino acids, and the more amino acids you have, then when you get your Maillard reaction from having heat and moisture and the protein content, you will get more color, with the same temperature. So it's much easier to make more highly kilned malt with that. And then you have different varieties, like, we have this Atlas variety, and so we know we need to soak it differently. We'll probably kiln it the same. I would say most of the differences don't come so much in kilning as they do in how you soak it and how you germinate it, or the time on the germination floor. But steeping is pretty critical. That's really, some people say that's the most important thing, and it's the least sexy part of making malt. Kilning is the sexiest part because that's where you get all the color and flavor. No kilning, no color, no flavor, all DMS precursors, unstable. You'd have to instantly mash with it. It would be horrible if brewers had to deal with that. But once you kiln it, I mean, oh my God, the colors, the flavors, the aromas, that's really the biggest single lever you have. It's certainly the most dramatic one, but how you steep it is going to be super critical into how it germinates and whether it gets fully modified or under modified. And so we can pull those levers too. But yeah, so for example, for various reasons, yeah, because we grow in different regions, we mostly use Copeland from the Klamath Basin, and we make all our organic malts from that. And we also make some of our specialty malts just because we make smaller amounts, and it's just production-wise, it's just easier for that. So most of our specialty malts tend to be also organic. And then we use our Butter 12, the UC Davis developed variety, for all of our fundamental base malts. That we've done great. We win all sorts of medals at the Malt Cup and all sorts of awards, way disproportionate to the percent of malt we produce in whether it's the Great American Beer Festival or the World Beer Cup or the California Craft Brewers California Brewers Cup. And we use our Butter 12 for our foundation malts, like our Admiral Pills, or our sort of European pills called Feldblum, or our pale ale style called Gallagher's Best. All those are made with our Butter 12 that's grown in the Sacramento area. So we do a little bit of what you asked, a little bit of everything that you asked.
All right, so I think we got time for one or two more questions. I think Louis got one.
Yeah, Ron, I'm curious, how long is malted barley good for? Like, does it lose diastatic power over time? Do the enzymes break down, or any of that sort of thing?
It does deteriorate over time. To us, my point of view, and I think there's some science to back it up for sure, certainly, but I very much believe that the fresher the malt, the more of an impact on flavor it's going to have. And you don't have to go to a far field than to think bread out of an oven, coffee out of a roaster, something stale versus something fresh. That being said, it becomes pretty darn stable when it's at 4% moisture content. If you're storing it at a cool temperature and a dry temperature, it can last years. How much? I mean, we'd had some distiller's malt with Savage and Cook, and the pandemic happened and this and that, and they had malt that was sitting around for over a year, and they said it still was like they had to dial back how much they used because it was so hot or so diastatic. But I'll tell you this too: when we make malt, it has to go from our kiln into bagging. We have nowhere else to store it. All the major maltsters will make malt. They will segregate it by variety and by protein content. And then they will reblend all that to get the kind of protein content and the kind of multi varieties that they want that's going to make their style of eventually malt. And so it may spend it may have been kilned and then spend 6 months in silos before it's even bagged. And then it's going to go to a major distribution center and then go to another distribution center. And then finally, maybe it gets to you. So if you're getting malt through BSG, especially European malts, but also American malts, you know, it can easily be 2 or 3 years old when you use it and you don't even realize it. So again, you know, all that to say is just like seeds can be under the right conditions, can be stored for thousands of years. You know, so malt can be stored and last if it's stored properly and lose less of its. You know, the thing that degrades enzymes mostly is heat, or so that's the biggest you know, thing for the. And of course, you don't want mold growing and that sort of thing.
All right, so we got time for one more question if there is one. Okay, so I think that wraps it up. So why don't we all give Ron a big round of applause, and he should be able to hear.